Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that we are able to now present the fourth edition of the Nabanna Earth Weekend or New Festival in Shantiniketan. And this year, we are delighted to be able to hold most of the festival in Shantiniketan itself. But some of our key sessions are still being done virtually, and this is one of them. And today we are going to listen to conversation between Asma Said Khan and Auroni Mookerjee, all about Bangla Ranna, about the food that Bengalis are famous for, both being sort of holding dear to their hearts and always talking about non-stop. And the very fascinating fact of how Bengal has been a hub of many, many influences, not just in terms of politics and ideas and literature, but also in terms of food. Thank you so much, Asma, for being here with us today on this session. So Asma is a Calcutta girl. Asma is an Indian-born British chef, a restaurateur, I never know how to pronounce this word, and cookbook author. She is the owner of Darjeeling Express, which is one of the most popular Indian food restaurants in London. She holds a PhD, oddly enough, in British constitutional law. So she's got a law side and very legal side to her, as well as her magic in the kitchen and her magic as a chef. She is the first British chef to feature in Netflix's Emmy-nominated Chef's Table, and the first chef featured in Vogue's list of 25 most influential women. Asma's debut cookbook, Asma's Indian Kitchen, won the Gourmand World Cookbook Award in the UK category for Indian cuisine, and her second cookbook, The Fascinating Ammu, was published in March 2022, and we hope to hear more about that today. I want to also mention here that one of the most, laudable things about Asma's work with cooking and as a chef has been the way she has involved women, particularly women from the subcontinent and other disadvantaged background women in the UK, and turn them into very, very professional and competent cooks. And I think that is something that needs to be praised and admired as much as anything else that Asma is doing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Asma. A very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you for your very kind introduction.
Not at all. Well deserved. In fact, I said too little. There's too much more to introduce about you. Auroni Mookerjee is a copywriter turned chef. He's had experience with Cafe Zoe and the Curry Brothers in Mumbai and the Salt House in Kolkata. And he is currently helming Sienna Cafe in Kolkata, which in the short term that it's been around has established itself firmly as a favorite go-to for people who really appreciate good food. And he's taken Sienna Cafe through a very difficult journey through COVID, and he's turned it around in a very interesting way. Dedicated to promoting the artisanal produce of Bengal. That is the sort of the motto of Sienna Cafe, and Auroni is certainly helping do that. He comes from a family of food writers, and he has himself contributed to and written reviews for Brown Paper Bag and LLB. We couldn't have found a better person to have this conversation and to help to moderate it. And thank you so much, Auroni, for giving us the time and for coming on board with this. And now I'm going to invite you to take over and start the conversation with Asma. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, ma'am. I think much kinder words than I or Sienna deserve. I think for me, this is more just an honor and privilege just to be talking to Chef Asma. It is a fanboy moment coming through, Chef. So thank you so much, and thank you, Anjum ma'am, for kind of putting this together, It's very rare that one gets opportunities to interact with, somebody who's definitely inspired not just my work, but definitely work at Sienna. We've been inspired by your recipes. We've been inspired by the, the principles with which you run the kitchen. Yeah, it really is a privilege to be talking to you, Chef. So let's start. I think what I wanted to kind of talk to you first about was your new book, because it's all I've been following on Instagram, other chef friends. Everybody's really excited about it. My pre-ordered copy arrives in a few more weeks, so I can't wait for that as well. But tell us a little bit about your book. And I love the title, Ammu, Indian Home Cooking to Nourish the Soul. I love the usage of the word nourish as well. You know, I mean, to me, this isn't an approach most chefs take to cookbooks or their own cooking. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? What was your thinking, and is this going to be a new manifesto for, other restaurateurs and chefs to follow?
I think it should be, because the thing is that I think somewhere along the way, a lot of chefs lost their way in trying to impress, in playing around with foam and, just new technology, using gizmos in the kitchen, trying to impress. I think we lost the whole soul of why we cook, because it's actually, if you just look back, the most expensive ingredient you are putting in your dish when you cook is your time. All other ingredients can be bought, can be replicated, can be replaced, but not your touch. So unique is your touch, like your fingerprints. When you cook something, it is something so intimate, almost like, worship. You are putting in something of yourself and you are presenting it to someone. I think that the value of why we cook hasn't been explained properly for a long time. I know that a lot of chefs who don't communicate about this don't even realize this themselves, that they are nourishing, that they are nurturing, that they are actually in some ways paying homage to the guest and to the person whose recipe they are cooking. But somehow this language is not used. Maybe it is seen as too soft, as too kind. But my God, we need kindness now. We've all been through so much. We have all been through so much. We are all on our knees after 2 years of pandemic. So even if people didn't understand, what they were doing, the value, the ethos, and also the respect for food, and the fact that, we have forgotten to value the person who actually grows the food, who brings it to you. When there was a time when supplies were in short supply, there were lockdowns, you couldn't get things. Suddenly everybody maybe understood and woke up. So this is why I wanted to use the word nourish, because I want to have a different kind of conversation. And I know the work you do in Siena, and I'm excited because I'm coming to Calcutta very soon in April. So I will come and eat in your cafe. And I think that it's wonderful to see young people. You are the future. You are the future. And if you all have that belief, just like, younger people are much more aware of climate change, you all are the activist generation. You are the generation that will change things. So this is very exciting to talk to you. And I'm very grateful that this whole connection Anjum has set up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chef. Means a lot. Just continuing from the same vein, though, I just need to add one point. So our first motto in the kitchen is flavor comes first. And, I know a big part of this thinking comes from, reading your cookbook, watching your show, your episode on Netflix. And I want to kind of take an extension from that. Our company was started by 3 women. Yeah, there is a grandmother, Didu, then there is Shanta ma'am, and there's Shuli, my partner. Her husband, Revant, and 3 of us kind of run this organization. You've dedicated this cookbook to your mom. Yeah. And I also saw you use words like respect, kindness, and the kind of manifesto you were just bringing up before that. Just tell me, how much do you feel that the best of Indian cuisine comes from mothers and grandmothers and didus or thammas, and how much that is a big part of what is cuisine of Bengal or Calcutta, and yeah, I mean, how much of that energy really draws into what you do?
I think absolutely the energy of Bengal is feminine, not just because we have a goddess like Durga. I'm a Muslim, but
Yeah.
I recognize the power of Shakti and of, the female
Yeah.
form that is worshipped and respected. I Unfortunately, the shift is that it has always been females in the entire subcontinent. In every home you go to in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, you will find invariably a woman cooking, a powerful matriarch. Even if she's not cooking, she's supervising
Yeah. Yeah.
and is heckling and
Yes.
is criticizing and is in charge. She's in charge.
Yeah.
But in every restaurant that is seen as mid level, high level, in these parts of the world and in the West, a man is in charge. And the problem is that I have no issues with male chefs. I, in fact, think that they have done amazing stuff. And, someone like you is, someone I respect hugely. There are lots of young people coming through. But the problem is that many of them cooked and learned to cook in culinary school. They learned to cook. If you look at every CV of every well-known Indian chef, they will have a 5-star hotel training. They will have gone to the same institutes. And the problem is that is a parallel education to the education we all got, cooking alongside our mothers, our khalas, our puppies, our chachis. That is, a bit of a problem, because this whole idea of mass cooking, of separating things out, of presenting food not to look Indian. It is the problem is it's a cycle, because those restaurants, especially in the West, and I can tell you that with great authority, who were given Michelin stars, presented the food in a way that, most of us would not recognize.
Yeah.
That was given a Michelin star. So every fine dining institute that aspires to get a star will again present their food as if it was something they stole from their neighbor's garden. Lots of edible flowers and micro herbs, dotted
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
little dots of foam and scratches of things here and there. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that this is not really our food. And in the food of Bengal, this is a land so rich that, every time, I'm landing into Calcutta and we pass over the greenery, I'm in tears. This is, this was described, this was used by Shakespeare to describe England, the Emerald Isle, in one of his stories. But I would say this describes Bengal. This is an emerald island. You walk the greenery, the richness,
Yeah.
and the kindness of people from this place. I have never remembered leaving anyone's house, even someone really, really poor, without having been fed. Nobody would come. Nobody would ask me, how are you? They'd ask you, what would you like to eat? Apni ki khan. This whole idea that, what are you going to eat is a greeting in Bengal. And it is so beautiful that, you get that sense of, food is the language of love, which is what I wrote in Ammu as well. That my mother was not very communicative. She's still not very communicative when it comes to, she will not say that, beta, I'm very proud of you, or, I love you. But she will sit and watch me eat something she made.
Yeah.
I feel the whole lifetime of love in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is why I was, this book was always something I wanted to write. The pandemic expedited it. I couldn't go home. I couldn't see her. At a time when a lot of my close friends, including my school friend from Calcutta, Lamatnia, passed away from COVID. I lost members of my extended family. 3 men died in 40 days. I realized that, there is no guarantee of anything. I want to write this book in her lifetime. I don't want this to be a memoir, because too many of us end up doing that. That when our mothers and our sisters and our close, influences in our life are gone, then we remember their haath ka maza, as we say, the taste of their cooking.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that. I wanted to do it in her lifetime, so I could do salam to her while she lived. Also, not just, this is a book, a very personal book about my relationship with Ammu, But I know that everybody who reads this book will connect to their relationship with whoever is the Ammu in their life.
Yeah, I mean, just what you said kind of really. My career kind of started, of course, in a much smaller way, but much like yours, Chef, which was that living room pop-up in a Bandra flat, and named after my Thamma. I mean, it was called Grandma Mookerjee's Kitchen. Though I used to do some fancy plating over there, I'm a little embarrassed about that. But I also didn't have a hotel school background. I didn't go to a 5-star hotel. Wrote copy for about 8 years before that. But I remember one thing about my Thamma. I used to fondly call her Money. And that's another thing about Bengal, duck names, you know, how
Yes,
we all
of course,
have.
of course.
Yeah. So cooking with Money was a really interesting experience, was because I think by the time I got into the kitchen with her, she was old, unfortunately, and she was doing more supervising than actual, you know, manual work. But I remember it was really hard to decipher any of her recipes because she used to say things like "shamanno, iktu eta," you know,
yes.
And that's not a recipe, right? So could you tell me a little bit about what it was like cooking with your mom, or what it is cooking with your mom nowadays, and how do you decipher her trade secrets?
I think you cannot call yourself a South Asian mother, grandmother, or aunt unless you give bad instructions on how to cook. Yeah. This is their trademark. Yeah. No, while I was cooking, I called Ammu. I wanted to know how much water should go in. She told me, beta, just put 1 cup of water. I put 1 cup, the whole thing burnt. So I called her back. I said, what did you say? She said, you know that yellow cup. That yellow cup, that's in her thing, is a jug. Is a jug. It's not a cup. But she knows I was trying to write a recipe and replicate it. And yet she said cup to me. And this whole thing at thoda sa. What is thoda sa? Thoda sa can mean anything. But I think that, you know, we don't realize this, but we all cook with all our senses. We are not following a piece of paper. So, you know, when I was writing this book, I was remembering Ammu giving instructions that to the cook that don't burn this, or turn it round, or, you know, check the oil, do this. So literally, I felt I was hearing the instructions. I was hearing the sound of the mustard seed pop. I could sense the smell of that roasted cumin seed already, the sukha mirch when it went in. So this is the thing that, you know, there is a beauty in this completely dysfunctional way in which our mothers and grandmothers tell us how to cook. Our senses are more heightened, I think, because they are giving such bad instructions to us that you are watching more carefully. You're waiting for the aroma. You're looking with your eyes. And I tell people when they, you know, this is why when I tell my women that thoda sa do, they will just watch what my thoda is and they will follow it. Because they're not expected me to tell me that you put 30 grams of this or that. We don't have a weighing machine in off tablespoon measures or anything. It is by touch. We measure with our eyes and our hands. And this is something that is so beautiful. But when I wrote my first book, even my second book, I struggled. I could not write. I can't write down recipes. I put it in my hand and then I have to wait, because obviously nobody can just, you know, I can't write a recipe book which doesn't have a recipe in it. So I've had to touch it, hold it, sense it and feel it, and then write it down in a piece of paper. There are all these scribbled notes that I have next to me. So I had to literally write it out, then call Ammu, put her on Zoom so that she could see what I was doing. And I'm grateful. And I think you should also do the same. You should start writing it down, because, you know, we need to leave a legacy for a generation that has not had the time we had. I mean, you are much younger than me, so you had a more disrupted upbringing from technology. I didn't. When I was young, going out to eat was the only entertainment in your whole life. Everybody on the table was sitting at the same time. No one was watching TV. No one was on their phone. The whole conversation was about the food, and also what are we going to eat the next meal immediately. You know, what's going to happen next meal. This was such an education that there was silence around that food. The food was not eaten with television. The food was not eaten and photographed for Instagram first, where you looked at it as if it was a post on your Instagram. You didn't look at it like, what has gone into this food. That we have lost already. That the generation we have now, your generation, already has got this, I don't want to say tainted, but tainted by technology. Your view of food is different from those that are older, where we saw food in a more sacred way. But I think I am very optimistic. I think your generation, people like you, are coming back home, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
You are coming back to your roots.
Yeah.
You are finding who you are. And this is the great hope, because we lost this time. The Gordon Ramsays of the world and Heston Blumenthal's, venerated as they are not chefs for me. They're playing with food. This worries me, that we, for a long time, for decades, worshipped on the altar of men, mainly white men, who played around with food, and also from bringing in this ethnic angle. We have had people taking away our cooking techniques, our recipes, our ingredients. I don't have a problem. You can be from Mars and you cook my food.
Yeah.
But you cannot take my food and not take me. If you are still abusive to me, if you still hate the color of my skin, my accented voice, my Muslim name, you have no right to eat my food. You cannot read you cannot read my books. You cannot listen to my music. You cannot wear my clothes. If you separate food and culture, you take my food, but you don't take me.
Yeah.
You have no right to cook my food.
Absolutely fair, Chef. I think just a surface level understanding of be it cuisines, and not putting in the aspects of culture, of humanity, it does become mechanical. And I think that it's cosmetic beyond the point. I don't think the empathy or the, that human touch comes in. You're absolutely right in pointing that out. Keeping that in mind, and I just realized that, it's been such an enthralling conversation. We're already close to, coming to wrap. I wanted to ask you one last question, and talking about culture and humanity in that sense, So I can definitely see that one big influence, which is personal about the cookbook, which is mom and family. But I'm sure that another big influence for this cookbook would also have been what is Calcutta, what is Bengal, and the fact that, we as a community have been shaped by such cultural diversity. We were just talking about, the feminine side of our culture, which is one big aspect. But there's also the fact that it's been a melting pot, The Nawab of Lucknow came here. There was Indo-Chinese cuisine that came out of nowhere. Even lately, suddenly, I'm noticing that I differentiate on my favorite kochuri shops, because some have a slightly UP taste, to it. Some have a very Bengali taste to it, while some are even getting a Marwadi taste, So that melting pot just continues with every decade, with every century. Tell us a little bit about that, and what do you feel is Calcutta's overall legacy, in Indian cuisine in that sense?
Well, I think that you've captured that beautifully.
Yeah.
I think this is what makes Bengal so unique, Calcutta so unique. And very often people ask me, that what is so distinctive about Calcutta cuisine? I said, you need to go there and breathe it. You need to experience it. From the Portuguese, the Armenian, you have all the influences that you mentioned as well. Incredible. And I think this is the strength of the city, that we embrace them. We have not vilified them. We have not segregated them. We have not lynched people who eat certain foods. Calcutta is the greatest city in the world because they embraced food and they accepted everyone and the food they ate. And in some ways, I think that strength that you see in the food tells everything about the strength of the city. And the whole world deserves to know who Calcutta is. If you come into my restaurant, that's a very strong theme. You have pictures of Calcutta. I talk about Calcutta. And when anyone asks me, what is the making of you? Two things. My mother, Calcutta. Calcutta made me who I am. Every day I am aware I am where I am today because of the city, where I was born, where I learned to eat, where I learned to cook. So it is a huge privilege and an honor to actually be able to bring Calcutta cuisine to London. And I hope more and more people, we already have chaurangi in here in Calcutta now. And I just hope more people understand how incredible the cuisine is of Bengali food, plus all the other variant, types from, Mughlai food as well. So yes, thank you. It's been really fascinating talking to you.
Thank you so much, Chef. The pleasure was all mine. And sincerely hope to break bread with you on one of your next trips.
Thank you so much.
It really will be a pleasure for us and our team.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe I'm going to leave one last question. When is the next restaurant in Calcutta being open? Are we going to see a Darjeeling Express soon?
Actually, it might happen. Okay. At some point. The Darjeeling Express needs to come home. There will come a time when it will come home.
I promise I'll be there for all the kitchen trials. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Lovely talking to you. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I really enjoyed that conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome once more to Nabanna Earth Weekend, or the New Festival 2022. We're very, very glad to have you back with us to listen in on this segment, which is a continuation of our session called Flavours of Change, Bangla Ranna, Local to Glocal. Today, Auroni is going to be talking further on the same subject, which was fascinatingly begun by Asma Said Khan, with two other food writers who actually have been associated with food writing for quite a while, and whose names come to the fore as soon as you think about interesting writing being done in and around food in India. Chitrita Banerji is a Bengali American writer who examines the relationships between memory, history, culture, religion, and food in her works. She is the author of several books on Indian food and culture, including The Hour of the Goddess, Eating India, and Bengali Cooking, Seasons and Festivals. Her other works include the novel Mirror City and a biography of Sri Chaitanya. A Taste of My Life is her latest book. She is a two-time winner of the Sophie Coe Prize in Food History and a member of the board of the Culinary Historians of Boston. Welcome and thank you for joining us all the way from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Chitrita.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure.
And we have also with us Chandrahas Choudhury, novelist and essayist. He grew up in Bombay and his native Odisha and was educated at the universities of Delhi and Cambridge. He is the author of 3 novels, Arzi the Dwarf, Clouds, and Days of My China Dragon. His essays on food, literature, politics, and culture appear regularly in the Wall Street Journal. And his most recent book is a collection of essays on literature called My Country is Literature, Adventures in the Reading Life. Now, Chandrahas, especially after his novel Days of My China Dragon appeared, began to manifest more and more as a writer who was very interested in food and the culture of food, particularly travel and food. And so it will be wonderfully interesting to hear him today talking about his experiences and memories with food from this region. Auroni,
thank you,
Chef
Andrew.
Auroni, as I should say, thank you for being here again with us.
Thank you so much for that introduction, ma'am, and welcome, Chitrita, ma'am, as well as Chandrahas. Ma'am, I'd like to start with a question to you to begin with. I just read a copy of your memoir recently, and I don't know, for me, it was very, it was a unique experience for me is because I'm a Probashi. I grew up not in Calcutta, and yet I've spent the last 5 years living here, setting up restaurants. And there's one very, unique sense that I got reading through each chapter and each stage is that as Bengalis, whether we're living in another city or whether we're in Calcutta or in the region, we're always leading 2 lives. One life that we live and another life that we eat through. What would you say about this? And you feel that as a culture, as a community, it's almost like we have a culinary collective unconscious. It's just a sense. I got through all the chapters and all the people you interacted with, and all the stories that were weaved in.
I hesitate to generalize about all Bengalis living abroad.
Sure.
Because, people are so different from each other. For
Yeah.
me personally, I would say, yes, I do have a kind of strange bifurcated existence. I live in America and, I work here, have worked here for many years, studied here, have lots of American friends, probably more American friends than Bengali friends here.
Sure.
More of my Bengali friends are in Calcutta. At the same time, in terms of food, which is how I think I identify myself very often, that part of Bengal is what is so important to me. Yes, I am very grounded there, and so in my writing also, you will see that, I very rarely, write about experiences of the immigrant Bengali living here. My imagination is almost totally encaptured by, the experiences of eating Bengali food in a very Bengali way. And that can be, reproduced or recreated in a foreign land, but it's never the same. And, that is one of the things I write about, that whether, you go back and try to recapture the essence of the past, or whether you try to recreate it in a different place, it's never quite the same. And so it's like a constant quest, by psychologically, as a writer in my imagination, I'm always on a quest trying to find the way of being and eating and appreciating food that I remember. But obviously, what you remember can never be what is present. And so that is one of the things that I have experienced over the last 30 years that I have been writing about food.
Sure. There was one specific chapter which dealt with the tropical fruits of the region. We were talking about the jam rule. We were talking about the various types of food.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yes,
how there's
jam.
It's fascinating that, you weave that chapter talking about the intersections between seasonality and yet at the same time, culture and religion, because there is the fasting aspect of it, there is the pujo aspect of it, that until a certain pujo. And I think that is a big part of just that essence you were talking about, the culinary culture of the region. Where do you feel it is evolving to a better place, or, there is a genuine evolution coming about? While at the same time, there are chefs like me. I think one of my biggest crimes is that I made a Malai Chingri risotto and it sold well at the restaurant. How much of a threat is this, or how much of a good thing is this, because for me, that was a way in which I wanted our diners to eat a mudo without seeing the mudo, so how do you make a bisque like, ghilu enriched stock and try and cook a local rice varietal in it? So I just want to understand, where is the spirit or the essence of, our cuisine in the region? Where would you think it would be at right now?
Well, I always feel that, Bengali cuisine, probably like most regional cuisines in India, is always innovative. This whole, I've had to deal with this often, this whole question of, what is authentic food, really is pointless to ask. I mean, food is constantly changing. Bengali food is particularly, very, very accepting of outside influences, outside techniques. And so when somebody like you is using the chingri ghilu or some other kind of a ghilu to make a rich, flavorful bisque-like thing, I would probably, be very appreciative of it, even though it is not like anything that we had, say, 20 years ago. I think the essence of cooking is creativity and inventiveness. And if you don't have that, then there is stagnation and, things just die. So, one day maybe you will make something with these fruits that you were talking about, that I wrote about, that, we can't even think about right now. But does that mean that those Bengali fruits are not still part of the essential eating experience of a Bengali? No. It's just that it's a different way of eating the same thing. And the more differences that we have, the more, explorations that we have. I think, like, T.S. Eliot said, we shall not cease from exploration. That is one of the, greatest things that, enriches human civilization. So I would say this is great. Keep doing it, really. And it doesn't mean that you are losing your Bengaliness or that your food is any less, Bengali than something that is made 30 years ago. I wouldn't say that,
Thank you. Thank you for that.
That's what
Chandrahas, talking about inventiveness. So, I mean, you wrote a novel that was based out of an Indian Chinese restaurant. Calcutta is, I mean, a lot of people agree that this was the invention of Indian Chinese. The birthplace was to the Indian Chinese community over here. Tell us about your favorite Indian Chinese haunts in the region. Not just Calcutta, but have you traveled to Darjeeling? Where does the influence get slightly different over there? With the Tibetan connections coming in, and I mean, and what was it about Indian Chinese that that really inspired you?
Well, since my book is set in Bombay, so it was in a way Indian Chinese twice removed, like a cousin twice removed. First of all, it's Chinese that came to Calcutta, and then from there it spread around the country and been transformed in Bombay again. I mean, I wish there was somebody authoritative who could say when Szechuan and Manchurian took their current forms in India, so that you can serve, and then it's suddenly Chinese. But in the main, I think what we've done with Chinese illustrates the very point that you are making. What you did with your risotto, that when you take a cuisine and try to reproduce it in a different foodscape, you have to alter it to some extent to meet the needs of the people who are going to eat it. Because in the end, food is not abstract art. Unless it's eaten, there's no point in cooking it. And unless it's appreciated, there's no point in being authentic. And this really, the lovely thing about so many Indians today, which I really appreciate about them, this is what's called cultural confidence, not just with their own culture, but any other culture that comes your way. When they go abroad and eat in other Chinese restaurants, they say, our Chinese is so much better. And this is something that we heard so often. And I have very of friends in all over the country who, if I were to say one day, let's go eat Chinese, they say yes, but only Indian Chinese. I don't want all that authentic stuff. So in a way, this is a much more truthful rendition of what food does when it travels than that entire search for authentic. By the way, just like in literature, I noticed that since food travels, it is remorselessly haunted by this voodoo of authentic on top of it. And although I like very much, I agree with Chitrita that there's no point in searching after this lost word and always trying to return to the past. What I do like still is hearing people say that this is not authentic. I'm going to argue till till the cows come home that we can agree at the point of reason that there's nothing like authentic. But I think it proves it has so many other uses to claim that something is authentic or not. Allows the speaker to claim a patch of land on the landscape of food, to say at least I know this much better than you do. So there's all sorts of other power dynamics that involve there, between mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, or sometimes the reverse. I'd love to say young people tell older people this is not authentic. You got it wrong, and we've reverted back to what it used to be. And it's every conversation proceeds on two poles: tradition and modernity, black or white. In food, this is authentic and innovative, and there's no reason why we can't enjoy both. And focusing on very particular cuisines like I did with Chinese, it was only, it's not like I set out, in every writer's journey, there's lots of serendipity involved. I never was that interested in Chinese until I began to live next to his restaurant. It suddenly turned into Chinese because it was a loss-making pizza restaurant. And from then on, because I was traveling abroad, and there were all these Chinese restaurants in New York's Chinatown, I would bring back menus because the staff was so gobsmacked that somebody who could eat Chinese abroad. and eat Chinese in China, in the so-called motherland of the cuisine they were serving, that I felt responsible, not to any reader, but just to these people these waiters of the restaurant, to sort of be the educator in the nuances of Chinese and chopsticks and all these other things. And I began to read and intensively and bring books back about Chinese. So I think that in itself, that messy journey is more truthful to the experience of food than any pearl of wisdom that I may be able to narrate about Chinese in India.
Okay, fair enough. You told me that you visit Calcutta quite often, and you like to roam around. What would be your perfect food trip? Like if you had to do 5 places you had to eat at through the day, and do it, in the typical Bengali way, that there's jol khabar in between, and there is a meal at 11 o'clock also after breakfast, and everything else thrown in. What would be your ideal 5 places?
Oh, you're asking difficult questions for Noria, but I have to say yes, Kolkata is one of the great food cities of the world. And 2 years when my mother was posted in 2006, I used to love coming over to eat. I think it would probably begin with dim sum or momos in Chinatown, isn't it? That's pork. That's the way to start the day.
Sure.
And then one might have a little bread chop or cutlet somewhere at Flavours at about 11 o'clock with a nice cup of Darjeeling or a bit of cake. That would be good. And then I would choose a hole-in-the-wall restaurant somewhere near Newmarket, where you get mutton, kosher mangsho. You just sit with laborers and market workers and eat with your fingers, like sharing a table. That is the best lunch to have. Then a good nap somewhere. You have to go home for that. Anjum's house, somewhere or the other, Jan Kriplan. They all live in this building close by. It's a question of whom to call. And then I think one home meal one must have in Kolkata. Somebody has to invite you. So one home meal and one meal in club, Saturday club or something like that, where you eat some, British food is also Kolkatan food now. The nostalgia for the Raj. So some sort of item like that, and then a full-on Bangla dinner at somebody's house, especially with potol bhaja, begun bhaja, chola dal, egg curry, which I think is in the East's gift to the rest of India, which for some reason they refuse to take. They refuse to take it, but it's very delicious, and I don't like any smell more than when my mother, boils these eggs for egg curry and then caramelizes a little sugar in the pan and throws the eggs in, and they become crisp. The outside becomes a little crisp, and when you eat that with a little luchi and potatoes, this is the way to live. After that, yes, no wonder we by the way, I also like generalizations about food. I do think us Indians, Bengalis, Odias, and Assamese do love food more. Perhaps that's why that explains the stereotype about us being lazy or non-hardworking. But we work hard at the things that really matter: eating and talking.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's an amazing day spent eating in Cal. And it's telling that you didn't mention Park Street. I think that
Flavours is Park Street, isn't it?
Oh, right. Flavours is, but I think the rest of the food for me, Park Street, you didn't mention all the classic hits like, a la Kiev or, going to barbecue or Mocambo and the like. So, it's great to eat also, of the off-beaten path in Calcutta in that sense. Chitrita ma'am, I'm curious, Calcutta or Dhaka, where would you rather eat? Or, what for you makes either places unique in their own sense?
This is a loaded question.
Yeah.
And, the more so because I haven't been to Dhaka in many years. I think my last visit was in 1989. And Dhaka has changed, enormously. And it has actually become much more of an international city than it used to be when I lived there. So, and as I've written in some of my work, some of Dhaka cooking kind of puzzled me at first and sort of disappointed me when I found that, anything that they made had to have onions in it, particularly vegetables. That really I thought was a bit disappointing, in terms of limiting the flavor. So when it came to that, whether it was fish or vegetables, I would always prefer to eat in Kolkata, whether it was in my parents' home or whether it was in the homes of others or even restaurants. But when it came to meat, preparations. I always felt, that Dhaka, because of its Muslim heritage, the Muslim traditions of cooking, was infinitely superior in many ways. Yes, they did not have the Kolkata style kosha mangsho. I didn't see it when I was there.
Right.
But there were just so many other ways of making meat that, I was both astonished and delighted to discover that. I mean, one thing that I've, mentioned before and also mentioned in this latest book is the use of, posto in cooking chicken. Until I went there and ate that, I always associated posto with, vegetable preparation, as it is in Kolkata. Or the way they would combine things, in Bangladesh. This is not specifically Dhaka; it's also outside Dhaka. But one of the things that I really, really appreciated when I first had it was duck meat that was cooked and presented not with rice, not with paratha or any khichdi, but with what they call chale roti, rice flour rotis, and that is a very traditional combination, which I had never heard of. Or one time I had this rice batter pita, but instead of, which to me was always the material for a sweet dish, but in this case, it had a piece of hilsa fish baked into it. And it was both astonishing and absolutely delicious. So I would say, yes, both sides of Bengal, have these, again, we are talking about innovation. And, this is the kind of thing that I really love discovering in Bengali food. And I know that it is there in so many, areas of cooking. So really, I can't tell you that, I like one better than the other, but I can tell you that, they have both given me incredible pleasure and delight and almost education in terms of, how we deal with food, how our society deals with food. But one of the other things that I would like to mention is that, we constantly talk about food and the pleasures of eating, but both Bengals really have come up with things that are the products of disastrous events like, famine and widespread hunger. And that's something that was brought home to me when I lived in Dhaka, because I lived through the famine of 1974. It was a really traumatic experience, and I shouldn't, say it's traumatic so much for me as for, the people who, really, died, and the people who had to be, deprived of food for days and had to be, going out. But, it made me think that because of that, certain very simple things were made into important parts of our diet, like muri or panta bhat, or that kind of thing. And this is something that I think we should treasure and explore a lot more. People like you who are doing innovative things. I think it would be great if you work with those ingredients.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, so this year our kitchen's brief is to try and get our larder to 75% from the local bazaar. And bazaar to table is, it's the, the theme for the year, that the kitchen is kind of taken forward. So let's see where we arrive with that. I really hope that we can succeed in showcasing these ingredients, because the bounty of this region is, it's unparalleled. It's the only reason I choose to, run a restaurant, not in Delhi, not in Bombay, or I just think that more people need to tell this story, of the region, its people, its cuisine, its ingredients. For me, since we were talking about, the West and the East Bengal side of things, shared passions, differences, specifically in terms of ingredients, or, just how the cuisine has evolved. So there is one passion that both sides share, which is the Ilish. I wanted to ask this question, and keeping that one ingredient in mind specifically, is that we were just talking about the famine. We were talking about the fact that, this region has gone through its ups and downs. And the Ilish is definitely one symbol of an up. If anything, it demonstrates our, communities' greed more than anything else, because for a region that has been kind of communist in its beliefs for the longest times, here is an ingredient where, sometimes in season it costs more than what the average person in the state earns, There's that side of it. There's, of course, the side that we are overfishing it. And, you rarely, I remember when I used to go down to the bazaar with my tamma 20, 25 years ago, 2 kg march still existed, I've been to the bazaar in Calcutta for the last 5 years. I visit almost thrice a week, if not 4 times a week. That's a rarity. So I kind of want to talk about, yes, there is this one side of, culture, of cuisine, which is talking about the people, the sociological aspects of it, the historical aspects of it, the legacy of it. But what about the legacy going forward? Where do we as a community kind of be mindful of such things? Ilish is definitely one such example. Nolan good is another very important ingredient, which I see that, the growing window is shortening day on day, week on week, because global warming, the winters aren't long enough. What do you guys feel about this? And what more should we be talking about, as a community?
Well, Bangladesh has been trying a lot to manage the, fisheries, in terms of Ilish. They have very strong rules about not allowing young fish to be taken out of the rivers and put back. And I believe they've had a lot of success in having the Ilish numbers go up.
Sure.
So I think, maybe West Bengal could also concentrate on doing something like that, since Ilish is, after all, such an iconic Bengali fish. Nolan good, that is definitely, I feel related to climate change. I don't know what we can do in terms of, maybe have more kaju trees planted. I really don't know about that. I'm not a climate scientist. And also, I wonder, now that you're talking about it, how should we feel about it? We Bengalis that live abroad and are always hankering for the fruit of Bengal, and that hankering is being given some satisfaction by businesses and shops that are importing those things. I mean, does that mean that there is more of a stress on the resource? For instance, there is a Bangladeshi store near where I live. And recently I have found that they are selling Nolan Gur. I mean, I can't believe it, but they are. And so that means, the more that comes here, the less there is there. So does that mean that, we should stop desiring these things and just...
I mean, a company in Chennai has the patent for Nolan Good essence. So that's why so many Bengali sweet shops sell it all year around now. There is actually a patented Nolan Good essence in the market. So, I mean, Chandrahas, would you like to add something, or should we maybe, hear an excerpt from your novel? What would you like to, kind of wrap this session with? Because I believe we're running short on time now.
Oh, I've got only one paragraph to read. So I might just say, of course, the world is changing. And, in the end, when you look back in time, every 30, 40 years, something comes into fashion, something else goes out. Sometimes it's a result of human influences, sometimes a deliberate attempt to change something. But what I really like seeing about young people in India today, especially once Instagram has arrived, that they are very interested in recovering our food traditions, whereas perhaps somebody of my generation, when I was 20, I couldn't have told you a thing. Except the cliches about Oriya food. So even now, when I come home, my great wish, I know I won't be able to do it. Someone else is to write a cookbook about travel around Orissa and gather the recipes and write it up in the cookbook, where maybe the cooking side will be, I won't be as good as the rest, but the writing will be, sensuous and will be the writing of someone who likes to eat. It's not just, the whole thing. I might end by asking both of us, me as an Oriya and you as a Bengali, come from great culinary cultures. But we might ask, why are there so many great Bengali restaurants in India and barely any Oriya ones? It's very, very hard to eat an Oriya meal outside of Orissa that's anything like great Oriya cooking.
Right.
And in a way, it also shows again, like with so many other things, language, culture, the hegemonic cultures and minority cultures, and there's a kind of balance of power, and some cultures can't get out for 10, 20 years, then something happens. All these things are worth observing. As an example of this hegemonic hegemony that was much resented when I first saw it, I'm going to read a paragraph from Days of My China Dragon, where the waiters in this restaurant in Bombay were all from Maharashtra and Nepal, but the chef was Bengali. While the chef cooked very well and I liked his food, the waiters detested it. And I'm going to read the reason why. I'm describing the other kind of meal that gets eaten at a restaurant, the staff dinner, when the customers leave and on the same table they sit down to eat. Although outsiders, and this is told in the voice of the proprietor of the restaurant, who's the narrator of the book. So he's describing what is the problem among the staff. Although outsiders to the industry never realize this, cooking for the staff is a very important task in the repertoire of a restaurant chef. After he has spent all day laboring far from home and family, you can't deny a working man the needs of his stomach, his food, the way he knows and loves it. And the waiters and kitchen workers despised Chef Uttam because he always made sure the staff lunch and dinner was Bengali food, made to his own taste, cooked in mustard oil and spiced with panchporan. Aloo phulkobi chorchari, dhime jhol, moong dal, begun bhaja, enough rice to feed 7 generations of their ancestors. This is what he and Barun made every day. No matter what I or the waiters said to them, the staff food always ended up being an offering to Rabindranath Tagore. It was most selfish of them. When they worked on Chinese food, it tasted like Chinese all right. But as soon as they changed to Indian, even the rajma tasted like it was made by a housewife in Shialda or Medinipur.
No, that's really telling about, kitchen meals. And I'd just like to end on the note by inviting all of you to come break with us, at our kitchen. And hopefully we can have what the team eats. I assure you.
Lovely.
For example, yesterday was some great pashe and shoshe, for lunch. So
yes,
there you go, Bengali food again.
And mache tele chochuri is one of the favorites. So hopefully, we can break bread and bhat over that soon. Thank you so much.
Lovely.
Can I ask Chitrita one last question?
Of course. Yeah, sure.
Which is, Chitrita, we sort of you also were talking about innovation. To your mind, what do you feel is the most interesting or path-breaking innovation that you've seen in Bengali cuisine, even historically, in terms of taking in influences from other places? What stands out for you?
If you mean using ingredients that were previously not common and then making something delightful out of it, one of the things that I always come back to is the use of posto in so many different ways. And this was a throwaway thing. It was a byproduct of the opium cultivation that the British imposed on Bengal. And then from there it originally became something for peasants to fill their stomachs with as an ingredient with rice, because they had to convert their land into posto cultivation instead of food crop cultivation. And then from there, if you come to modern times, I think it's amazing the way that posto has been used to make many different snack like things, as well as boris, vegetable concoctions, of course. And I think, that this is something that this trend or this, ability to use a sort of very, very, what was unimportant at one time into something that becomes an absolutely, delicious and, desirable part of the food is something very Bengali, and which something, is something that, I think people like Auroni are probably, carrying forward, and so I'm looking forward to, that kind of food that is produced by imagination coupled with innovation. So that would be good.
That's a lovely line to end with. Imagination coupled with innovation.
Yes.
Thank you. So we come to the end of this session. Thank you, Chitrita. Thank you, Chandrahas, and thank you, Auroni, for
thank you so much.
Passionate interest in food with which you've conducted this conversation and turned it into quite an Adda. Thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your days, all of you, wherever you are. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Already, that was a fascinating session, and it's lovely to have you as a continuity factor here. I think you and I were introduced.
Right.
Nayana wasn't. Nayana is a really well-known host, Calcutta host. She curates tours of food experiences as part of Calcutta's really rich heritage. And she runs a homestay here, Chota Koti. This is where Maku Soren, a Santal from Puldanga village in the neighboring Bolpur part of this area, lives and works. For the past 20 years, with Maku's active involvement, they have developed an interesting menu of regional delicacies, including tribal dishes of the local Santal rites. And I have to say that we're really, really grateful to Maku. She's had a major bereavement, but she's still here today. Bengal has always had a large bit of coastline. So naturally, there was a lot of interaction with traders, and a lot of foreign influences in food were picked up. There was the Malay curry. So the Malay curry, probably from Malay sailors. There was potole dolma, most probably from the Armenian, not Greek, the Armenian dolma, which was in grape leaves, wrapped in grape leaves. So this was in the pointed gourd. Huge amount, really. Batabi lebu, which is from Batavia, pineapples, which came from Philippines, all taken into our cuisine. Even the cabbage and cauliflower came from Britain, courtesy Britain, the okra from Africa. The list is endless. So I want you to talk about specific things that we have imbibed from them and assimilated into Bengali cuisine.
As a region, we've always incorporated ingredients from all over the world, but really made them our own. I don't know, it's something that I think, you know, one of the biggest reasons we are good at this as a community and as a region, and something which Chef Asma pointed out in the conversation before, as a eating culture and community, we're very open-minded. And this is something that I have, in fact, tried to promote a lot more, because I'm finding that with the younger generations that open-mindedness is going away, you know, slowly. You know, the love for choto mach, the love for vegetable peels, the love for waste generally of unusual things. This open-mindedness, I mean, our culture, the Bengali culture definitely has other Eastern, you know, say you go into Assam, you go into the Northeast, you go into Oriya. Why that is, I think I don't know any better. Beyond the point is because I am too Probashi, but it's also the biggest reason why I think I have ended up staying back in Bengaluru and Calcutta for these last 5 years. Because for me, it's fascinating to see the fact that as a community, our palate is open-minded to trying so much, you know, and I think as a chef, as a professional who is constantly in the kitchen, cooking the same thing over and over again, because unfortunately, that is the routine of a restaurant life. You're constantly looking to try new things. You want to refresh your palate. And I mean, as a chef, let's take away the side that I'm trying to rediscover my roots or, you know, try to feel more in sync with my grandparents who have passed away, you know. But for me, it's more important that there is always something new to be tried. And also as a diner in Calcutta, I have diners who are that open-minded. They always want to try something new, embrace it, relish it, love it. So, you know, starting from, just like you said, the Malay curry.
Yeah.
But even today, the fact that a Choudhury shop can have a slightly Marwadi bent to it. And yet it is extremely popular. You know, there are hundreds of diners there every day. And to me, the hallmark of all great eateries is how many people do they feed every day? It's not about the price they charge. It's not about the ranking they get. But it's just about how many people go and eat there, you know.
I'm going to come back to this later, but one thing that you said is about the younger people not really being interested in food traditions. I must say it's a huge help to have programs like MasterChef, where people cook panta bhat and then everybody's talking about it. And you ask the question in a quiz and people can actually tell you, young students, what panta bhat is about. Nayana, you've been curating food experiences in Kolkata for a long time before we come into what you're doing here. Now, we have so much in Calcutta. We've got the Mughlai experience, even before Wajid Ali Shah in the 13th century, right at the beginning. There was this Nawab, Nawab Khilji, Bakhtiyar Khilji. He actually started that trend of Mughlai food in a place. He settled down in Navadvip. He defeated Raja Lakshman and he settled there. And of course, then Wajid Ali Shah came in with that huge potato, of course. And just because he wanted it, let's set the record straight here, not because he was broke. And it was a novelty then. In fact, it came in via Portugal. A hugely interesting story. 5,000 to 8,000 BC in Peru, the Incas, taken to Europe by the Spanish, brought to India by the Portuguese, I think in the 15th century. And then ultimately taken on, expensive item included. But the Nawabi Mughlai experience and also the Chinese experience. We had one Mr. Achu who came here in the 18th century, settled down in Ichapur, opened a factory, started producing sugar. That in itself is an interesting story. It was called Chini because of them. Before that, we don't really have any documented version of sugar, refined sugar being used in Bengali cuisine. So that's another story. But they shut down their factory. They moved to first Tiretta Bazaar. Then they moved because of local objections to the tanneries to Tangra. So that's two major cuisines that I want you to tell us about. And I love that statement of Chandrahas says every true blue bong Calcuttan, it resonated with them. We don't want their Chinese authentic. We want Calcutta Chinese. So tell us about it.
So I think this is very interesting, particularly in today's times, and I don't want to get into the political situation. But whenever we celebrate in Calcutta or in Bengal, the first thing that we do is get ourselves a biryani. And considering we are slagging everyone who is the precursor of the biryani, I find that very, very disturbing. Bishwakarma Pujo does not happen without biryani being part of the lunch menu. So when I do my tours in Calcutta, and I do several heritage and cultural tours, and food is very much part of it, I actually go the fairly traditional route of starting with the kochuri, aloo-dum, et cetera, and if we are in the north of the city, I try to end up having lunch at Yuchu, which is one of the oldest Chinese restaurants. And
oldest now.
It is now the oldest Chinese restaurant. Nanking was older. And it's the fifth generation running it. And the mother and son cook if they're in a good mood. And if they're in a good mood, you get fantastic food. If they're not in a good mood, you have a slight problem. I think Shumatro would probably like to say one of his other favorites, but whatever. What we do is, I have never looked at a menu at YouTube, for instance. I let them decide what we should eat. And if I'm unwell, for instance, and I'm taking this away from the tour, but I'm just talking about myself personally. If I'm unwell, I go to YouTube to eat because they give me comfort food. And that's the stock. The main thing about Chinese cuisine, and I think also Mughlai cuisine, is the stock, is what they cook in. Am I correct? And this stock is cooking for a long time before you put in your vegetables or your meat or whatever else that you're going to put in. I think 10 days ago, I had the misfortune of having 13 vegetarians on a food tour with me in Calcutta. And they insisted on going to YouTube for lunch. I did not have lunch that day. It was, well, they enjoyed it. So well done, YouTube. we go from there to Tangra, and there is a shift in cuisine. Corn flour becomes a little bit more predominant. The cuisine has shifted to things like Szechuan and Manchurian, which Chandrahas very correctly asked, like, we would like to know how and where this came in, because nobody knows. And if you ask YouTube for a Szechuan something, he gives you such God knows what that you cannot, it's inedible. Okay, so this is Hakka Chinese that they know and they have cooked for generations, and that's what they cook at home, is what they serve you. But if you go through the menu, you will find all kinds of potato chili, da, do, da, which is really not any Chinese that anybody knows of in China or should have known on Calcutta. If you're lucky enough to be invited to their special events, you get to eat the authentic food. So when I take my guests, very often there have been guests who've spent an enormous amount of time in China. So they're very skeptical about Calcutta Chinese. So I said, well, give it a chance, and they go with me and they're gobsmacked. They're just sort of saying, oh, wow, this is really good. I said, thank goodness. And then in the evenings, and my tours, which should be 6 or 8 hours, end up being 10, 12, 14, God knows how many hours, and they're 1, 2, 3, 4 days. So of course we do the mocambo, because I'm absolutely insistent, and for various reasons, because you really get, if somebody has a tummy upset, frankly, you just want a sandwich, you can get that there. You get also what we have, the mulligatawny soup, which is very much part of the Calcutta cuisine, though it's come from elsewhere. You get a tandoori chicken, you can get a chicken tetrazzini. We had an Italian chef sometime in Calcutta in the 1950s. And where chicken alla Diana came from, I'm not completely sure of, but whatever. So sorry? No, and Nitin has said that he's not going to change the KIEV to KYIV. So we hang on to our traditions in Calcutta. The end of the 1, 2, 3 days, I'd like to take them for a Mughlai cuisine. Now that could also end up at Qualities, and we do bheja fry there, and people are open to that. Or we take them to a sort of a traditional Nizam rolls. Again, is very essential for my tours, and they do fantastic biryani too. And then I would take them to the biryani. And when we are on Chitpur Road during the days, I point out the different areas where you get the different food, and what would have happened if you started at 5 in the morning, and what would happen if it's winter and you went on to have your nihari and the paya and the etc. And as Auroni said very correctly, that the club kachori, which is definitely UP Marwari in taste, is terribly popular. But one of the other places that I take them to is Balwant Dhaba, and it's in the Gurdwara, and they make the most fantastic tea and kachoris for the evening. So, you sort of pan India, and this is the whole objective of Calcutta, and we've been hearing this earlier, is how do you have pan India, pan global in Calcutta?
Nayana, I just want to step in here. You talked about Nizam's roles. Now, Budi Shaha, the great Indian roll factory.
Buri, my brother, we grew up in
she
the
has taken that to New York.
Yeah.
It is a huge success. It's there in London. And while we're on the topic of Indian Calcutta Chinese, I've actually seen a signboard at a pretty impressive place in London saying Calcutta Chinese.
Yes.
So that really makes you feel quite proud. Of course, when poor Monica Liu, who on New Year's, who serves the most authentic Chinese only around Chinese New Year, she went to China to take Indian food there. They chased her out, not because she was bad, she was hugely popular and they couldn't handle that. But Auroni, one thing we tend to overlook is the huge contribution that Bengali widows have had on vegetarian food. There was a time when they couldn't forget onions and garlic. They couldn't even have pulses like mushur dal. And they had to literally, when they cooked their own food, of course, the reasons were very clear. It was all about finance. They were young widows. They didn't want to support them for long. They wanted to get rid of them. They were not supposed to be healthy. And the excuse used was they're heating foods. Of course, I've never understood why it's okay for men to be heated and not women. But nevertheless, they were heating foods. So when they sat down to cook their meals, they had to be innovative. They started using the stems, the roots, the peels. You know, you mentioned it. Alur kosha diye. It's superb. It's something that people die for today. And a huge amount of the evolution, the innovation in Bengali vegetarian cuisine happened because of them. There is also something else about the Bhakti movement, Chaitanya's movement, where he didn't want to slaughter and they turned to vegetarianism. One big contribution from them, the Khichuri, which also started being offered as Vogue. That I believe is attributed to them. So talk a bit about that.
Let's just start by how I look at this from a professional side again, because like I said, I haven't lived in the region. I'm Probashi in many senses. So let me just give you my, outtake from what is definitely a cultural, practice, which has evolved. I mean, a tremendous cookbook, not in real terms, but I think someone should actually write it, and keeping that in mind, But look at all the great cuisines, look at all the, at least around the world, if you look at Spain, you look at Italy, you look at France, it's less with more. And at some point, that culture has gone through some sort of hardship, just like, the beginning of Niramish cuisine, so to say. There is that form of hardship that has come about. In France, you saw the revolution come in. Italy and Spain saw the World War, and I think that hit them in a totally different way. So today, what most people don't understand is that Nonna's ragu or pasta, Italian Nonna's ragu or pasta, has to be made with tinned tomatoes. And they have just found a way to do the same thing. I mean, why is olive oil so important to them? Because that one ingredient adds flavor to lots of other things which probably didn't have flavor, So I think it's always important, of course, to understand the cultural side of things, but also understand that why culture quite often derives benefit and useful aspects through function. And if you have less, you don't have any choice but to make the most of it.
Most of it, yeah.
There is a less is more aspect. There is also the practice aspect, because if you only have 10 things to use, you're going through that ritual, that routine so many times over with just those 10 ingredients. Chances are you're going to find, yes, you are going to innovate and you're going to find facets of it that somebody else hadn't thought of because they weren't pushed there.
The vegetarian demer dalna, which is chana diye toiri kara, and green jackfruit, the kebab, which is or the curry, which is like kosha mangso.
So it's not just about being in a hard place, but I just think that innovation comes from being pushed there.
Wonderful point, really. Nayana, would you all, both of you, like to tell us about the innovation that you're doing at your homestay?
Actually, this is very interesting because, we've been talking about this, I think, from what I heard and from Auroni and you. So, the idea of innovation and cuisine, of course, it's for all these global reasons. But when we are talking about tribal food, I think very few of us actually know anything about it. And we are probably familiar with this very infamous ant pickle from Jharkhand, and that's beginning and the end of that. It does not actually go to other tribal communities. Now, Maku has been with us for over 22 years. And for the longest time, she pretended she did not know how to cook. The food that we saw her eating was muri. She now tells me they had panta bhat. So there we go back to panta bhat. Fast forward, they now have a gas, which earlier, sadly, they have a gas. Earlier it was a matir unun and kathir unun and with koila, whatever. And when we were talking about this food, she told me a lot of things that they cook and the way they make it, which I have not seen her do because they no longer do it. So I'm going to let you tell her about that. Tell her or whatever it is, like. But what we have done, and I will take it back from her, is we've innovated with some of the foods that she's been making into our cuisine. And this I've only discovered over the time that I've been living here, the past 2.5 years over the COVID period, that they use a lot more food than we thought. So I'm going to let Maku, I'm going to introduce it, and then I'm going to just tell her to tell you about the way they cook. Maku, আমরা যেটা বলছি যে তুমি আগে কি খাবার খেতে, পান্তা ভাত তুমি যেটা বললে তোমরা যেটা খেতে, এখন তোমার মাংস দিয়ে নয়তো তোমাদের অন্য আমরা যেটা বলছিলাম যে ছাতা দিয়ে মাছ পোড়া মাখা গুলো কি কি খাও?
আমরা আগে মানে পান্তা ভাত আর খড়ের ছাতু ওইসব দিয়ে আমরা মানে খেতাম। উনুনে ওই গোবর দিয়ে ডিম সেদ্ধ করতাম, ডিম সেদ্ধ করে ওইটা খেতাম।
গোবরে মেখে, ডিমটা গোবরে মেখে উনুনে নিচে মাটির নিচে দিয়ে
তারপরে মাংস যেটা আমরা শুয়োরের মাংস করতাম, ওইটাও আমরা তাল পাতা দিয়ে মানে বানতাম, দিয়ে ওইটা উনুনে ঢুকিয়ে ওইটা মানে আস্তে করে ওইটা হয়ে গেলে আমরা বের করি আর ওইটা মানে খেতাম। আর মাখাগুলো আমরা এই তিল বাটা, টমেটো পোড়া, কুমড়ো মাখা, ওল মাখা এসব আমরা খেতাম।
So makha is just, you paste it and you make it into a round sort of ball and you have little bits of it. Now, what I have noticed about their cuisine is that they use very little oil, largely because they couldn't afford to use oil. তোমরা তেল খুব কম ব্যবহার করো?
আমরা তেল মানে খুব কম খেতাম, তেল মানে একটু, নুনও খুব কম, মশলাও মানে সব জিনিসে আমরা কম খেতাম।
আর আগে যে পান্তা ভাত আর মুড়ি খেতে, এখন তোমরা অনেক বেশি অনেক বেশি জিনিস খাচ্ছি।
আগে আমরা ওইসবই খেতাম, গ্রামে বাড়িতে থাকতাম তখন।
Again, it ties up with what Auroni said, that need is the mother of invention or innovation.
So what we have done is that আমরা যেটা করেছি ছোটা কোঠিতে নয়না's হোমস্টেতে, এই মাকু, আমি হঠাৎ দেখলাম যে মাকু এই তিলের পোড়া করছে, টমেটো পোড়া করছে, এই মাখা সেই মাখা, তারপরে ছাতু, তারপরে what was the greatest discovery for me is the Bengali escargot, which is my nickname, which is Googly, and it's a Geri Googly. So ওইটা হঠাৎ, তারপরে ছোট মাছ ছিল, ছোট মাছ পোড়া। আর so most food are roasted, used to be baked in the oven or roasted underground, and now they cook it on the gas because they have gas. So what we have done at the homestay is inculcated some of these innovative things that we're doing. Like, for instance, the tomato pora works very well as a dip, as a tomato salsa, really. The sesame paste we are using instead of posto. So we do posto ta na diye, we are doing aloo sesame or sesame bhindi or sesame sheen, and also using that as a dip. And with the Geri Googly, I'm using that in my pastas. And we are incorporating the pork dishes with my own vindaloo dishes as well as beef. So when we do beef, we add a sort of a lemon rice which is South Indian, and we have a lot of curry pata in the house. So this is what we are doing.
Before we end, I'd just like to make a note, two things that I'd like to mention. One is that in ancient times, non-vegetarian was never forbidden to even Brahmins, the upper caste, or priests, practicing priests. And the second thing that we really should have touched on, it's so important, is that so many of the things that we think are so Bengali, fish fry, chop, cutlet, Kobiraji cutlet, they all came from the British. The very, Asma mentioned, somebody mentioned that bit about tea. The very tea habit that we thrive on came from the British. So this has always been Bengal, so receptive to many layered cross-cultural influences, which also touch upon food. And I think it's enriched us in so many ways, but it's lovely that we are taking it to the world, not just the great Kati Kebab company, not just Asma's Darjeeling Express, Chaurangi, but all over, like those signs which say Calcutta Chinese, etc. It's a whole new cuisine. Thank you so much. That was a session in the 4th edition of the Nabanna Earth Weekend New. It's absolutely wonderful to be here in person. Auroni, Nayana, Maku, thank you. Thank you all of you for being here. This was really wonderful. Thank you for asking me. Thanks.